Hi everyone, I'm Rob Panting, the Communications Manager at OxLEP. Welcome to the latest in our edition of Digital Q&As, this time focusing on the topic of connectivity. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to our Chair, Howard Bentham.
Thanks, Rob. Hello, I am Howard Bentham and welcome to the next in our series of Digital Q&As from the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. At OxLEP, our aim is to provide a platform where Oxfordshire businesses can ask questions and get some expert opinion from members of our invited panels as we continue to evolve our businesses and our lives shaped by the restrictions and ramifications from this pandemic. For this Q&A, we'll try and explore and resolve how critical it is for the county to remain connected post-COVID-19. We'll look at the initial impact the virus has had on connectivity and infrastructure in Oxfordshire. Also, how connectivity might evolve in light of the multiple pressures it's experienced in recent times, not least because of coronavirus, but also issues around flooding and climate change, and indeed what challenges Brexit may bring. Hopefully too, we'll hear what the new normal might look and feel like for connectivity here in Oxfordshire. Before I introduce our expert panel, I'd just like to extend an open invitation to you, our audience. We always endeavour to cover as many and varied areas for discussion as possible with our digital Q&As, and we're very much open to suggestions from you as to where to focus our content. Do feel free to contact us directly. You'll find details on the OxLEP website, as well as our social media channels. And we look forward to hearing from you and leading these conversations in the direction that is most relevant for you. So let me introduce our panel today. We're delighted to have with us Phil Southall, who is the Managing Director of the Oxford Bus Company, Thames Travel, Carousel Buses, as well as City Sightseeing Oxford. He's been in post since 2014, following stints making the buses run on time in various corners of the UK, from Sunderland to the Isle of Wight. His company this year is the proud recipient of a National Express Golden Spanner Award for Engineering Excellence. Who knew? He's also the chairman of the Confederation of Passenger Transport UK and the Oxfordshire president of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. In addition, he's a non-executive director at OxLEP. Also with us is Craig Bauer. Craig is the programme director for Better Broadband for Oxfordshire, which is developing and leading Oxfordshire's digital infrastructure strategy. The current programme includes management of multiple contracts with the private sector worth around £45 million, with an ambition to make the enterprise ultimately cash neutral for Oxfordshire County Council. The Digital Infrastructure Partnership is signed by all district councils, the City Council and OxLEP, and it's brought superfast broadband to over 97% of homes and businesses, with nearly 79,000 premises connected, 648 kilometres of fibre laid, and 705 cabinets put in place. Interestingly, Craig was schooled in South Africa, graduating from the University of Cape Town in the early 80s. And we've got with us Mansbridge. Jon is the Funding and Benefits Realisation Manager at the Environment Agency. He's been in post there since 2003 and has literally seen a lot of water pass under many Oxford bridges in that time. He's worked tirelessly to secure funding from the government for the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme, which ultimately will protect around 1,200 homes in the city. So a warm welcome to all of our panellists. Connectivity is one of OxLEP's key strategic pillars and also acts as an underpinning focus of the Oxfordshire Local Industrial Strategy. It aligns with each of the 5 foundations of productivity outlined in the UK Industrial Strategy, namely ideas, people, infrastructure, business environment and places. The ambition for the Oxfordshire Local Industrial Strategy is to position the county as one of the top 3 global innovation ecosystems by 2040, highlighting our world-leading science and technology cluster, and to be a pioneer for the UK and our emerging transformative technologies and sectors, hence connectivity. So let's explore what our panel view as the biggest challenges for connectivity in Oxfordshire currently. Phil, if we can start with you, how has the pandemic, with all of its knock-on effects, impacted on connectivity in general in Oxfordshire?
Well, the impact on buses has been significant, Howard. I think nationally, most bus companies are back about 55 to 60% of pre-COVID levels in terms of their patronage. But we're very much behind average in Oxford. If you look at the different areas of the businesses that I manage, if you look at the city network in Oxford, that's running at about between 40 and 45% of normal, so less than half. If you look at the services that come in from the market towns into Oxford city centre, what is our Thames travel network? That is about average, approaching 60%. But there are areas that are really struggling. So if you look at the airport services to Heathrow and Gatwick, they're running at around 20% of normal. The city sightseeing tours around 20% of normal as well. So if you add them all together, we're running at about 45% of normal. And if you look at the railways, they're even less than that. I think they're running between about 27 and 33% of normal. So we've got some real challenges in terms of patronage and rebuilding confidence to come back to public transport. And added to that, of course, we've got additional cleaning to make sure that the buses and trains are spotless for people to get on, and regular touch point cleaning and regular deep cleaning every night when they come back to the garage. So the impact has been very significant on public transport indeed.
And what about from your angle on this, Craig? What have you seen as the real knock-on effects on connectivity?
Well, it's been massive, and you know, it's not an easy thing to say, but in fact, the obvious scenario for us is that whereas, you know, buses and other means of connectivity have been quite hard hit, digital connectivity, of course, has increased in value to people working from home disproportionately. So we have had a huge amount of interest in our program, and watching people upgrading their broadband increasingly from fibre to the cabinet to fibre to the premise. Significant growth in internet traffic. There were some concerns that the sort of profiling of how that network traffic was running across the network would cause all sorts of failures in the access network, and that's not materialized. You know, the overall amount of traffic remains the same. So whether people are in an office, you know, doing things online, or whether people are working at home, the actual amount of traffic that runs across the network is more or less static. But the profiling has obviously been a huge shift to those people now working from home who were previously in large offices. And indeed, you know, the county council itself has effectively moved out of HQ and has everyone working from home. So yeah, so the impact has been significant. I would say we're quite pleased in that the communication we've had has not been, there's not been that many people coming in who've been really, you know, found that they can't work from home. The general prognosis is we're now at 98% coverage, and pretty much all those 98% have had the means of being able to carry on with business pretty much as usual.
And John, from your viewpoints, give us your take on it.
Yeah, from the Environment Agency's point of view, you know, we always embraced remote working and kind of virtual connectivity. So using different video calls and things like that to reduce our carbon footprint as an organisation generally. And I think obviously with the majority of us working from home, we've just seen an increase in that. And it's shown the importance for both virtual connectivity and physical connectivity. I think a lot of our schemes that we work on, so the big infrastructure flood risk schemes, are partnership led and partnership funded. So we've just had a new settlement with government for a further £5.2 billion that we're going to be investing in flood risk resilience measures across the country. And we find that virtual communication can go so far and is effective, but especially when you're building new relationships, there's nothing quite like face-to-face meeting. And I think that's where we've really seen a bit of an impact in terms of the speed it takes to build those relationships, etc. And from a personal note, you know, through the lockdown process, I think it's made people appreciate their own surroundings a lot more. And I think, you know, we're really lucky in Oxfordshire and the environment that we have here, and that's why it's so important that we look after it. And I think access to good quality green space has been really important. I think people have really appreciated that in the lockdown when we're in isolation, working from home quite often, being able to get out in a lunch break or after work and get into that green space and appreciate your environment has been essential. And I think that's why big, large-scale schemes like the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme is going to be really important for cities like Oxford, where a lot of the time, I think, as we go back and work our way through COVID, I think people will be a bit more flexible where they work. They won't always be going into the office, and they'll be working from home, and having access to green space, such as the area of land to the west of Oxford, the Oxford scheme will take up, will provide some of that access to green space for people's general well-being and everything else that comes with that.
If we just rewind a little bit and remember those days when there wasn't coronavirus, I mean, if we're being honest, there were issues with connectivity in the county before the pandemic. Again, go through Phil, Craig, and John with your views, your particular frustrations, and now where we can look for possible solutions with the new eyes that we have now. Phil, what's your view on that?
Well, one of the benefits that the pandemic's given us is that 80% of the economy survived with 30% of the cars. So that does go to show, with the right policies and interventions, what is achievable to shift people onto public transport. I think for the first time ever as well, Howard, my buses ran 95% on time because there was traffic. And everybody was, the few people that were travelling were delighted because their bus was turning up on time more often. So the challenge, as far as I can see, is how do you, I know it's a cliche, but build back better in terms of retaining some of those benefits going forward. And there's some obvious main areas to focus on. So there's the whole inclusivity point. You know, don't forget that not everybody has got a car. So if fewer people are using public transport, we need to make sure there is enough service left there for everyone else to use. So we're talking to the government about things like recovery partnerships. So if the network isn't as big as it was before, because fewer people are travelling, we need some additional funding to keep those services going, to include everybody who wants to travel in the economy. A bigger one is the whole decarbonisation agenda as well, is that Oxford or the bus companies in Oxford submitted a joint bid with the county council to become the first electric bus town nationwide, and that was a 50 million funding opportunity, of which the operators would at least have to match that as well. And then that's an opportunity to transform our buses from being diesel based to electric bases, but to be electric based. But that comes with challenges as well, such as power supply. You know, I think people assume that there's an infinite supply of power when there isn't. You know, so we've got to think about how do we get that into our depots to get those zero emission buses implemented. But more importantly as well, you can't just put a zero emission bus in the same traffic. So as you say, we had free during the pandemic, and we need to try, what we've worked out is that in order to be able to afford these buses to make our contribution to the government contribution, we need to speed the buses up by 10%. So we're looking to our political masters to find ways and means of putting those interventions in on the road, one of which is bus gates, which is a well-rehearsed debate that's been taking place very recently, but there are other ways of trying to reduce traffic to improve bus speeds as well, to give people that zero emission future that they're seeking. And this is as good a time as any, because the government has announced that before Christmas they'll be announcing a national bus strategy, and us locally in Oxford need to be ready to take advantage of that, to join our zero emission vision for the future with congestion busting measures, because there is going to be money available to do it. We just need the bold vision to achieve it.
Yes, the dream of getting in and out of Oxford pain-free, definitely. What about the particular frustrations, Craig, that you've come across previously and now looking at it with post-COVID eyes?
If I may choose to answer that question slightly differently, one of the main threads that we had with the investment profile we put into digital infrastructure was around the fact that it would be a significant contributor to helping people not need to travel into the office, and therefore take cars off the road, and therefore be a net positive for us in terms of addressing our problems with climate change. So that was always one of the key threads of ensuring we had decent digital infrastructure. And I think all that's happened effectively in the back of this is a massive social experiment to find out whether and how viable it is for, on a sustained basis, people to be able to work from home. And I genuinely believe that there will, you know, post-COVID, there will be a return to work. People will go back in, but I don't think we'll ever be quite the same way. I think there'll be a much wider use of people taking 2 or 3 days a week to work from home, and the balance of the days. I think it gives us an opportunity to really find how we do that. We wouldn't want to do it in a big society fashion where we're telling people what days they can use their cars. But logically, if you think about, you know, being able to have, if you are working from home 2 days a week, and everyone does that, or most people do that, and they alternate them so that you don't have, as was currently the case, as was the case in my experience before COVID, where it was sort of Mondays, first Fridays and then Mondays that people were working from home. If we can spread that out across the working week, that's going to make Phil's job easier. It's going to help our ambitions to be carbon neutral. So it's all a good thing. There are downsides, obviously, to the city economy, the town economy, and local trade within the city centres, and there's a whole review needs to take place as to how we use those spaces. But for me, this has been a good slot of evidence provided under unpleasant circumstances that have proven that we can do it.
And Jon, particular frustrations and where we might look for solutions?
I think, as Phil referred to earlier, we've all experienced the challenges of transport network in Oxford, and I think, you know, Oxford is a national economic asset for the UK PLC, and I think we've been very successful with the Local Enterprise Partnership, the Environment Agency, and wider partners such as the bus companies and the county council, etc., attracting funding into Oxford. And I think it's about making sure that we're looking to build back better, as Phil says. I think, you know, buses are part of the solution, but we also need to be looking at improving our green transport in terms of cycle and walking access. And I think that all comes hand in hand. And when you do make big investments into infrastructure like the Oxford scheme, we can look at improving what we're doing to make sure that we're facilitating that kind of change in behaviour. I think Oxford's quite good at cycling anyway, and you see quite often at park and rides people either jumping on buses or onto their bikes. And I think things like the Oxford scheme, where we're going to be enhancing the east-west routes across the scheme area to make that more possible for people and that cycle journey safer and more enjoyable, that only will help as we come back, as Craig says, to a mixture of working from home and working in the office. And it's about making that commute easier and cleaner.
Craig, as we've touched on, working patterns have changed and have probably changed forever. I'm sure, as you said, there'll be some sort of give and take on this. And obviously, we have what is essentially a rural county that we operate within. Tell us about the gigabit voucher scheme that you've got running and the impact this is having.
That's a great leading question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about that. So, yeah, we have DCMS have been running a voucher scheme for some time now, aimed at rural premises, whereby the government would support the cost of installation of the infrastructure to provide full fibre. But it was a fairly modest sums of money involved. We have recently been successful through OxLEP in getting £1 million worth of top-up funding via the Getting Building Fund, which has enabled us to now offer both residential and business premises up to £7,000 as a voucher value. So we're putting quite a lot of work now into marketing that with leaflet drops to those premises that would most immediately benefit, i.e. those that are currently still really poorly served. The bit we're seeing, which is a general problem, is a lot of people who've got 40 megs, 50 megs at the moment are perfectly happy with that. You know, it suffices for their day-to-day needs right now. And therefore, any efforts required locally by a community to go and form a scheme to apply for full fibre upgrades, the incentive is not immediately in front of their face now to apply to get that funding in, because they're okay. But you know, we all know that line of demand is completely linear, and within 3 or 4 years, that 50, 60 megabits that people have now got will not be enough. So you know, anything we can do to encourage people to take full advantage of all and any schemes running to upgrade their infrastructure to full fibre, we must do so with vigour, because that then is a completely future-proof platform that will really put us on the world stage for having great connectivity.
Well, I'm sure from the companies and indeed the individuals listening to this, that they'll be going, well, how do I get my hands on £7,000 to upgrade it? So what's the way in?
Right. So just Google DCMS Gigabit Voucher Scheme. That'll give you access to a landing page. But also we have a mailbox, broadband at oxfordshire.gov.uk. And if anybody wants to write into us for a steer as to which supplier, how, where, when, we have capacity normally to be able to provide decent answers to help that path.
Phil, if we can just come back to the sort of public transport aspect of this. I mean, how have businesses survived the first 6 months of the pandemic with reduced passenger numbers? I mean, some of the numbers you were talking about there were obviously scary from a businessman's point of view.
No, they are, and the government has stepped in. So bus companies nationwide are in receipt of something called Coronavirus Bus Service Support Grant that pays you a rate per mile for the services that you are running. So it doesn't complete. The idea is it should get you back to a break-even position where you can't make a profit. There is obviously always some tension when you're in receipt of government funding and what you can and can't do. But fundamentally, it's about trying to get bus companies to a break-even position. But the problem we've got with that mechanism is that it's not a one-size-fits-all nationally. So they've come up with a single rate. But long distance, because it's mileage-based, long distance, more rural operations benefit from that scheme. But low mileage urban areas don't. So Oxford City network is not breaking even as a result of that. Normally the buses are stuck in slow moving traffic, so the mileage you're doing isn't high enough to cover the costs, etc. So government funding is a really important bit of it. But as I said earlier, being inclusive, all of those key workers that we needed to keep going through the pandemic, the government wished to step in to make sure that was so. And we've worked very closely in partnership with the county council on what those frequencies and what those networks should look like in partnership. And we've been very responsive that if people were not didn't have access to a bus, or that the bus didn't run at the time that they particularly wanted, we've been working very closely with the county to do that. But the position we find ourselves in is not a sustainable one either, because this condition where we're not allowed to make a profit whilst we're in receipt of this government funding, our PLC shareholders don't believe that's very good. So at some point we have to try and basically break off the bits that we can make money at and make a profit on and make a dividend to our shareholders, etc. As well as trying to protect the rest of the network using some mechanism, which is why we're talking to government about something called recovery partnerships. And I know that's what the LEP is working on, is a recovery plan. And transport is a fundamental part of that, because we do need to get back to where we were in order to fund the investments that we need to, excuse me. And the same goes for the railways, really. The government has put them on special, what they call IRMAs, which in effect is the government is taking the revenue risk, allowing the operator to make a very small margin. I think it's 1.5% or 2%, something like that. And whilst they carry out a review of how the railways are organised as well. So I think this will have implications for how transport is planned in the future, because the government doesn't have infinite money. We need to keep our shareholders on side as well as PLCs. So we're going to need to all work in partnership to really find a way through this in what are very trying circumstances.
I mentioned to Craig that obviously we're essentially a rural county, and previously we've spoken before about this, trying to serve that difficult to reach rural customer base, and it's obviously in normal times not always cost effective to run the buses, hence the sort of reduction in service. So in a weird way then, this has actually impacted on the rural communities in a positive way.
Yes, it has, because it has put many communities, whether they be urban or rural, at some disadvantage when there is not as many people travelling to cover the costs of that service. But I think in terms of the rural problems, I'm absolutely signed up to the idea that it's not going to go back to normal, and if people can work from home more, they may choose to do so. But that doesn't mean we should give up on the rural mobility problems. So we do have a bid in with the County Council at the moment on the Rural Mobility Fund, which was an opportunity that closed in June to try and come up with creative ideas for rural transport. And one of the ideas that we pitched was for a demand responsive service that comes in from the villages to the main road to feed into what we call a mobility hub, where the interurban bus, if you like, that goes from a market town into the centre of Oxford would call at that mobility hub. And it's a win-win, because you would be bringing people in from the more rural areas to a place where they can get on the bus on the main road, in effect. And that will therefore benefit the patronage on that service as well. So let's keep our fingers crossed that we can try that concept out. And if it works, this concept of rural hubs across the county might be one that we can run with, especially when you add them onto new developments where you can put the shops and the school and the cycling hub and everything else at the same place, so people aren't rushing around as much in their cars, because that's an excuse we get at the moment, or a challenge I should say, is where people say, oh, I can't possibly use the bus because I've got 4 or 5 things to do that require me to get to different places. If you can put them all in one place, then that's just different thinking that we can potentially move forward.
Jon, how is the threat of climate change likely to affect connectivity in the county? If you can give us some specific examples, that would be interesting.
I think over recent years, we've all seen firsthand or through the media the impacts of drought or flooding that are kind of natural events. And obviously, with climate change, and the science has shown that we're going to experience more extreme versions of those particular natural phenomena. So we're going to see heavier downpours of rain that's going to result in more extreme floods, etc., at deeper depth. So that's why it's important that we invest in infrastructure such as the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. You know, when that's delivered, that will be basically reducing the flood risk to all the homes and businesses that are at risk of flooding in Oxford currently. And with the modelling that we use to look at the climate risk going forwards, by 2040 there'll be an extra 2,000 properties that are benefiting from that scheme. So that really shows you the shift in terms of the number of people that currently aren't at risk, but with the climate change predictions by 2040 there's going to be a whole another level of people and their businesses and properties, residential as well, that are going to be at risk. That also has the impact on obviously the infrastructure that serves those communities. So be that broadband will be protected as well. The Oxford scheme will be reducing the risk to broadband services by protecting the streets and where those cabinets and broadband are found. Also are key pieces of infrastructure. So Oxford itself is reliant on a number of arterial roads in and out of it. So the Botley Road and Abingdon Road will be protected and have their risk reduced significantly by the Oxford scheme. And also the railway line in and out of Oxford. So we're covering all those bases of both the virtual and the physical connectivity into Oxford. And as I've previously said, Oxford is a critical economic hub for Oxfordshire as well as UK PLC as well. So it's a really important scheme that we invest in. It's important to say though that the climate change isn't just for the next 40 years. We're looking over the next 100 years. So with all of our schemes, like the Oxford scheme will last, the benefits will be delivering over the next 100 years. But by the time 100 years have passed, we'll be back to the same level of risk that we are currently now. So on day one, the scheme reduces that risk significantly, but that benefit will be eroded over time. So as an organisation, with that £5.2 billion settlement that I've talked about from central government, that will help facilitate further partnership schemes that will look longer term, so into the future, so plus 2040 and onwards, about what we can do to reduce that flood risk, rather than just place-based solutions such as the Oxford scheme that are critical in that journey of tackling climate change and the current risk. We need to deliver those first, but then we need to start looking more widely and maybe catchment-wide storage and things like that. So that's the kind of where we're coming from a climate change point of view.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the flood alleviation scheme in Oxford is a crucial part of that jigsaw, but as ever, as I'm sure you can tell us, obviously you solve a problem in one area with water and it will go somewhere else, and we've got a lot of river in Oxfordshire. How is that going to impact on the rest of the county and with schemes that the Environment Agency will be running?
Yeah, so it's important to say that all of our schemes have to go through the kind of planning process. So we have to abide by the National Planning Policy Framework. That part of that is a flood risk element that says any development that occurs, be that our kind of infrastructure project or a new bus depot or housing or new broadband facilities, all of that kind of stuff has to show that they're not going to increase flood risk to anyone else. So the Oxford scheme, for example, that will not be increasing flood risk to anyone. Otherwise, all we're doing, as you say, Howard, is moving the problem on. So the Oxford scheme, as an example, is basically creating more capacity by creating a new stream through the western floodplain of Oxford. We're removing 300,000 metres cubed of material out of that floodplain to create that extra capacity for floodwater to be there rather than on our roads, in our broadband cabinets and over the railway line or people's property. And that's the whole process there that's happening. So it's just creating a bit more space for water in an area that's being constrained by historic developments such as the A34 or the railway line in Victorian times, or all the residential and commercial property that was built along the Botley Road across the floodplain over the last 100 years.
I think from what you've just said there, it really does show how much joined up thinking is needed here to get connectivity working right across from what the Environment Agency do, what Craig's trying to do with broadband, indeed as Phil's trying to do to keep the buses running. Craig, I mean, if we can just come back to you, I mean, after the challenges of COVID-19, there's an even greater challenge of climate change, as Jon's been pointing out, and that's going to put great pressures on the city. What could be done now to help businesses prepare for what's likely to happen climate change-wise?
I very much like the analogy of all. I mean, the three of us on this call all have a vested interest in this subject, and they do all integrate. I'm not sure I can answer your question properly, but there is a wonderful opportunity that we are well underway with now, which is we've got the baseline foundational superfast broadband. That's fine. We're now looking at what we can do with the income that we have got coming in back in from our investments in the contract with BT. We've got over 75% of the people who are connected to that network now using it, and that's accruing a little pot of funding for us to use. And we are working a plan up now to, for example, try and get full fibre across the whole city of Oxford, and along with that would include mobile coverage, so 4G and 5G infill in the city centre. That then creates the opportunity for us to start thinking about a much wider Internet of Things sensor type deployment of measuring things. That would not almost certainly have a role to play in the Environment Agency's world of managing flood defences, dynamic signage, making, routing cars around problems rather than directing them through them. So I think the next iteration for us as a county council, if you like, is we have the benefits that businesses in the economy will accrue as a result of the infrastructure being available. We're now looking at how the county council and its services that we provide can benefit as well from the integration of fixed and mobile fast connectivity as the next iteration of connectivity.
Jon, has the pandemic set the Environment Agency plans back locally at all?
I don't think so. I think it's resulted in different ways of working, similar to what we were exploring at the beginning of this conversation. I think it's a case of we've been working very closely with Oxfordshire County Council as the Highways Authority on their design process of their programme for the replacement of the A423 bridge, so part of the southern bypass to Oxford. And we're looking at that opportunity back to kind of the whole building back better. We are taking this opportunity to say, well, how can these two schemes be integrated? We're reliant as a scheme for the water that's coming into that extra capacity that I talked about in the Western floodplain, moving through that road embankment and either side of the railway line down that location. So we are working with the County Council to make sure that that replacement bridge is designed in such a way that it's more efficient in terms of for taxpayers' money, but also so we're aligning our programme so we can deliver it as quickly as possible. The pandemic has meant that we've had to take slightly different approaches. So we're meeting using video conferencing rather than face-to-face on a weekly basis in terms of the project managers. We're also, when we're having to do more detailed investigations for slight changes in alignment of the scheme in that area, so environmental impact assessments and things like that are being carried out in slightly different ways. So people are travelling to sites separately rather than in the same car to make sure it's COVID safe. We've enhanced our health and safety assessments to make sure when we're out on site, we're bearing in mind the general public and things like that. So we're not coming within 2 meters without extra precautions of any members of the public, etc. So we can carry on delivering as fast as possible, but at the same time, not increasing anyone's risk while doing that.
Impressive. If we can throw the word Brexit into the mix here, Phil, if Oxfordshire is to achieve its global ambitions and bearing Brexit in mind here, how much focus is needed on both the physical and digital capabilities of the county? We'll get the digital view from Craig in a second, but on the physical aspects of connectivity with Brexit in mind?
Yeah, well, obviously the county has tremendous growth ambitions, obviously with the local industrial strategy that the LEP's presented in the form of its investment plan to government, one of only 6 LEPs nationally that have got that in place. So there are within that, there are 20 individual business cases in effect that need backing by government, which is going to lead to more growth. The pressures that puts on us all is there are only so many people in Oxfordshire, so the whole labour market will then come under more pressure. And when you're a bus operator like me, go further afield to attract people to come and work for you. So already I have people travelling from Swindon, Northampton, Cheltenham, places that are quite distant from Oxford because the pay rates are better because of the competition for the labour in Oxfordshire. That has implications on the transport cost as well, because if I have to pay a higher rate to get people to come and work for me, at some point that needs to be passed on in fares if it's going to be sustainable, unless the funding comes from elsewhere. So I think the traditionally low unemployment rate in Oxfordshire is good in one way, but it's not very good in another way because the pool is only so big, and as the competition hots up for that labour, some people get left very short, and unfortunately transport is one of those areas. Even though my bus drivers are the most well paid in the country, even higher than London, I still struggle to recruit enough in because there are alternatives out there that are more attractive to people than shift work. So I think that will, and the fact Brexit is happening, and people who come to work for us who come from overseas, if that pool is smaller, then that will present some labour challenges for me and others, I suspect.
What about the Brexit factor on our digital capabilities around Oxfordshire, Craig?
Yeah, massive in a number of different ways. Whenever I've spoken to local small and medium-sized enterprises around Culham, Harwell, Milton Park and so on, the language being used is they are competing with Hong Kong, Tel Aviv, Silicon Valley, rather than other parts of the UK, and they draw the distinction that each of those real dynamic, world-leading areas are world-class in digital infrastructure is the common theme. So, government has committed £5 billion worth of funding to get UK to full fibre by 2025. We, as Oxfordshire, have worked very hard at working with government on that programme, and are now one of the pilots for working even closer with the UK on how that strategy is going to evolve. And that should give us an opportunity to be at the very front of designing how that £5 billion is spent and get as much of it into Oxfordshire as soon as possible. The downside of Brexit is we have got ultimately a dependency on a lot of the installing fibre broadband is predicated on civils. Civils is digging up roads, and a lot of that work is currently done by people who will not be able to do that job, Eastern Europeans in the main, working for civils construction companies. We've lost a lot of that skills, that resource pool, or are losing them. But we are taking advantage and in fact working with the LEP on some programs to try and find out how we can implement apprenticeships in terms of fibre engineering and civils contracting roles to see what we can do to get people who are shifting out of highly vulnerable areas of work in the current COVID environment into areas where actually we could see them in gainful employment. So I think there's an opportunity and a risk to us presented by Brexit.
Just give us an idea where we are as a county with some of the wider big ticket digital connectivity objectives, Craig. I mean, the rollout of 5G, public area Wi-Fi spots, some of the more sort of sexy head grabbing. It's growing well.
In fact, in the paper that I read preempting this, we were talking about a 7% penetration or availability of full fibre, and that as of today is 15%. So that really is growing quite steadily and nicely. Ironically, we've also had Banbury announced by Openreach as one of their first fibre towns. So that's Banbury done. So we're incrementally seeing hard yards being won in rolling out full fibre. Mobile's a really important area. We do absolutely see 5G as being a solution to help us create, especially in logistics, manufacturing and agriculture, a much wider opportunity for our businesses to be able to do things in a much more efficient and effective way. We have now got Oxford plan for 5G coverage with about 15 or 16 macro cells around the city being built or upgraded, both by Vodafone, EE, and quite possibly the other two. A lot of the work we've been doing under the memorandum of understanding that you referred to at the start of the conversation is about coordinating planning policy responses so that when we are looking at upgrading the mobile infrastructure network, it's coordinated in a sensible fashion to typically want to go ahead and allow this stuff to get built rather than worry about it being an eyesore, and that's a political discussion, a political issue. It's not straightforward, but I think COVID, if anything, has helped us understand the importance of connectivity, so that's helpful from that respect.
Philip, just coming back to you, what role does public transport have to play in a post-COVID Oxfordshire? Paint your picture for us.
Well, I think the decarbonisation agenda is going to decarbonisation is going to be critical to the future. Whilst a lot of people can work from home, there are a number of people that won't be able to. Key workers who've done so well through the pandemic will still need to go to work, etc. And I think people really there needs to be a shift in thinking about how serious this need to decarbonise is. So if you look at some statistics that the Local Government Association has produced recently, it's basically saying there needs to be at least a 5% improvement each year. And if you look at what that actually means, it's a 5% reduction in the number of trips made by 2050, which supports what's been said about more people need to not travel. A 2.5% reduction in distance travelled by 2030, increasing to 13% by 2050, and a 10% reduction in car mode share from 71% to 61% in 2030 and 41% in 2050. And there needs to be a shift to active travel. The list goes on and on. The Local Government Association has produced a document on this that came out in September. But I think the size of the decarbonisation challenge is underestimated by a lot of people. And I think that's where public transport needs to come into its own, is people need to know that they're playing their part. And you know, I think the bus gates debate we've had recently has showed what the shift of thinking is that's required, because people automatically say, well, if you put that there, I have to drive in my car around the ring road. And it's, well, no, we're trying to persuade you that public transport is the obvious choice to get you out of your car, rather than think I've got to go a different route. It's that shift in thinking. If we really are genuinely going to achieve net zero carbon by 2050, people need to get onto buses and trains and active travel and out of their personalised transport. So I think we do need to decarbonise it. We do need to speed it up, but we need that shift in thinking to make sure that public transport is the obvious option.
Let's try and sum up, chaps, what's been an excellent conversation. Give us your view on what the new normal for connectivity is going to look and feel like in the next 12 months going forward. And let's hope we can put this coronavirus behind us. John, I'll let you go first.
I think, you know, we've heard about a lot of the work that's going on to improve connectivity in Oxford, and that will continue to happen. And the industrial strategy is a key part of that process. And I think we just need to make sure that climate change doesn't come in and take us a step backwards. And that's why it's important that we invest in infrastructure such as the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme to make sure that we do keep Oxford open for business. So let's keep the floodwater out of people's homes and businesses, off the roads and off the railway lines, so people can carry on connecting, be that virtually through broadband services or physically through you know, reduced carbon transport methods.
Craig, what about the new normal? What's it going to look and feel like in 12 months' time?
I think it'll be a continuation of more of the same. I think the opportunity is here for us to accelerate the importance. I think digital infrastructure was increasingly important before COVID, but I think it has rapidly escalated into being what it should always be, which is as important, if not more important, than traditional connectivity, dare I say, from my side of the fence. So I see that continuing. I think we'll have a lot more engagement with government. It's very, very high up the government's agenda as well. So we need to line up our actions to make sure that we execute well on plans to get both 5G and full fibre built in and baked into everything that we do as a way of thinking. So I think it's more of that will continue.
I think what's been a fascinating part of this conversation is how very separate each of your three specialisms are, but how interconnected they actually all are. So give us your prognosis going forward then, Phil. What's it going to look like, our new normal?
Well, I think as you know, hopefully we'll get a vaccine and things will come back to returning to our town and city centres. I think inevitably more people will continue to work from home, at least some of the time. So I absolutely support the fact that digital connectivity is going to be ever more important. But that confidence will come back. People will want to travel by public transport, and we need to make sure that in that local transport and connectivity plan, we set out the foundations for what people really want to see to make public transport the obvious choice. The centrepiece of which, as I said earlier, is decarbonisation. And how on earth do we get the zero emission buses in enough power to make sure that they can move and speed them up enough to make sure that people can get from A to B in a predictable time? So all of that, I think, is possible, certainly over the next 24 months. But we need to put the building blocks in place now and try and retain those benefits that we did get of free flow public transport during the pandemic, and not forget the importance of our key workers in an inclusive society and not leave them behind because other people are choosing to work from home if they can. We need to absolutely look after those key workers too and make sure that we are having inclusive growth and an inclusive going forward.
Thanks for that, Phil, and thanks to our brilliant panel for this OxLEP Digital Q&A. Phil Southall, Craig Bower and Jon Mansbridge. As I mentioned at the outset, we really want to hear from you about topics to discuss in coming weeks and put questions on your behalf to our invited panelists. So do please follow us on our social media channels and feel free to get in touch. And don't forget about the fabulous resource on the OxLEP website relating to all of the matters discussed today. Please get on to oxfordshirelep.com to find out more. For now, from me, Howard Bentham, thank you for watching and goodbye.